Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking very specifically on the focus of breastfeeding aversion, which is something that is, I feel like, very much unspoken about, very much unheard of, and can sometimes get confused with the likes of DMER and dysphoric milk ejection reflex, and also can be confused with feeling just like touched out. And so today I wanted to really break down those barriers, talk a little bit about breastfeeding aversion, might make it more likely for you to experience it, and then we'll go into some of the tips and tricks on how you can manage it. If you haven't been here before, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Kitty Hackle. I am an international board certified lactation consultant. I'm also a birth worker, birth and postpartum doula, hypnobirthing instructor, antenatal educator, and called mumma by 3 little people. I love to talk about things from trying to conceive to pregnancy, birth, postpartum, breastfeeding, and everything in between. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the content that I have on the way. So I have here a list of the different things that I want to touch on, because aversion apparently is something that I'm quite passionate about. And the first thing that I really wanted to break down was the difference between breastfeeding aversion and DMER. So with DMER, it's highly driven by hormones, and it's very much something that is experienced mostly pinpointed to that moment of letdown, that moment of milk ejection reflex where we release our milk. Oftentimes there's an overwhelming sense of self-disgust, self-hatred, and sort of depression that comes with that sensation and that feeling that very quickly dissipates. However, with breastfeeding aversion, it tends to be much more spread out. It can be for the either portion of or the entire duration that your little one is latched on. Things that can make you more likely to experience breastfeeding aversion can be feeding through pregnancy. That's me. Feeding multiple babies, so whether that is tandem nursing twins or triplets or quadruplets, or whether that is you are nursing an older child as well as a smaller baby. So all of these things make you a little bit more likely to experience that. Other things that I've noticed that have made me more likely to experience breastfeeding aversion are coming up to my period. So if I'm expecting my cycle, then I will be more irritable and more likely to have an aversion while my little ones are breastfeeding. I also have noticed that if I haven't had any self-care, if I haven't had any time to myself, if I haven't had a chance to maybe move my body, or I've been having a lot of feeling like very touched out, then I can experience more aversion. What does it feel like for me? So for me, breastfeeding aversion, when my little one latches, from the moment that they latch, feels like very much a skin crawling feeling. I can feel a little bit of a feeling of sort of irritability towards one child or both children, whoever happens to be latched at that time. And for me, I always joke about it in saying that I feel like I want to throw my kids out the window. And this feels like maybe an unfair description, but for me, it's and that's the description that I will use for clients who are struggling with this. And so many of them will nod and agree. They're like, yes, this is how it feels for me too. So feeling like you want to just throw your kid out the window, that your skin is crawling, is more likely that you're experiencing breastfeeding aversion versus that overwhelming sense of doom, specifically at letdown, which is associated with DMER. So it's nice to break down the two. I have a whole highlight on DMER if you feel like that's maybe you and you want some supports in navigating that. So for me, navigating breastfeeding aversion has been a struggle. It's something that I feel like doesn't really go away for me until my colostrum starts to transition in. So I think specifically it's those early pregnancy hormones that really sort of set it off. So for me, it's ways that I can manage it, navigate it, and help to make it a little bit more easeful. The first thing is a deep latch. Having a baby who is flutter suckling or has a shallow latch on the breast makes that feeling of aversion 10 times worse. So coming back to those same principles of a deep latch that you would have if you have a very small newborn baby. So making sure that your little one is opening their mouth wide. You can ask them to open their mouth wide. You can tell them, you can say, ah. You can shape your breast in ways that you would similarly to with a small baby, using that flipple technique where you're tipping the nipple up the nostril so they have to anchor their chin first and roll the nipple in last second. That can be a really helpful one with with an older baby. But making sure that the latch is deeper means that the nipple will hit back further in their mouth. So if you're imagining, if you feel on the roof of your mouth, you've got your soft palate and your hard palate, further back is your soft palate. That's where you want your nipple to be in their mouth. So tip number 1 is come back to those really basic tips of the deep latch. The next thing is manners, boundaries, creating limits that feel appropriate, helpful, supportive for you. So for you, it might mean being still. For me, I find it incredibly irritating if my little one is like writhing around on my lap, making lots of movement, turning their head to try and look at what's going on in the room. So we have a really clear rule in our house that if you're nursing, and we're not doing anything else. So if we want to read a story, we're reading a story. We're not having a story and booby. And so for you, it might be a time limit. It might be we only nurse for X amount of time, for the duration of a song. It might mean that we only nurse in a certain place. So maybe it's dark at bedtime where there's no distractions. Maybe for you, nursing at bedtime has become a huge no-no and you find your aversion is spiking. Then it might be time for you to do some gentle night weaning in response to that sensation then. So have a look at my nursing manners highlight on Instagram. I feel like I talk a lot about the different ways that you can apply these nursing manners, but for me, this is the first point of lesson in bodily autonomy, but also in consent. So if you say no and you're saying this is how it's okay for me, that our little ones have to learn to respect that and understand that. So manners, time limits, or just limitations and boundaries in general are really, really helpful. The next thing then is just speeding up the feed. So if you find, if maybe you're not pregnant and you're experiencing breastfeeding aversion, maybe it's that you're feeling very touched out, maybe that you have, for me, if you have like any sort of a sensory issue, having a slimy wet breast and a baby nursing and being very hot maybe, or having any sort of neurodivergency can mean that we are more likely to experience breastfeeding aversion. So it might be helpful for you to reduce the limits that you are nursing for. So with an older baby, that might mean for the count of 10, for the duration of a song, for instance, or for a smaller baby, reducing the time that your little one is nursing for by compressing the breast. So you're forcing the flow of milk forward, so they are getting more milk faster. You can also do this by offering both breasts, so they are getting that nice flow of milk in a shorter duration of time, meaning that breastfeeding aversion and that sensation becomes shorter and so much more manageable for you. The last two things that I like to talk about is supplementation with magnesium. For me, I've been adding in these trace mineral drops and also adding in some sort of an adrenal cocktail during the day, and almost within 24 hours, I noticed the breastfeeding aversion becoming more manageable. And I don't know whether there was any sort of an interlinking thing there. There is some evidence that's anecdotal. So some women will suggest that they've experienced less of a feeling of aversion when supplementing with magnesium. So for me, it was a no-brainer to give it a try. So that's one thing that's worthwhile considering. And then finally, the last thing is distraction. So our brains are very clever, and they can also, similar to how we will use a TENS machine or a comb during labor, we can work with that sensation pathway to redirect where our brain and our body focuses on. So for me, it can mean really basically scrolling on Instagram. So I will be nursing, but I'll be scrolling, and I will give myself that time and remove any mom guilt from doing that, because it means that my little one isn't picking up on any sort of feeling of me wanting to throw them out the window. They're not picking up on the feeling of me not wanting them to be there. So that is really nice. The other things that I will do is I will sometimes pick my cuticles or push my cuticles down. Sometimes I will count like this between my fingers and toes. Sometimes I will just clench my fists really hard. Sometimes I will wiggle each toe up to the count of 100, if I can do that. Sometimes I'm focusing on humming the same tune out loud, or singing a song, or trying to meal plan for the following week, something that's going to be really boring and really all intensive and engrossing. I'm losing the feeling in my toes. But that has been really helpful for me. And if you have easy access to acupressure bands or points, that can also be really helpful to be able to press on those plasters or points while you're nursing your baby, just to really bring yourself back into your body and give that change of focus, that change of direction, of sensation. They're the main things. I feel like all of a sudden breastfeeding aversion is much less of an issue than it was even last week. And I know I'm not over the hump. I know it's still there, but having these new tools and being aware to utilize them every single time we nurse has made it so much more manageable. I hope you found some tips here. I hope you found it helpful, and let me know down below if you've experienced or are experiencing breastfeeding aversion, what sort of tips you would add in. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.